Welcome to the Power of One. My name is Brian Berry and I'm the host. This program demonstrates that one person can make a difference. Today we're fortunate to have Alma Stokes with us, a community volunteer. So thank you very much for being with us today, Alma. We'd love to find out a little bit more about what you've been up to over the past decades in Pasadena and in particular recently. First of all, I just wanted to find out a little bit more about how you ended up in Pasadena. My understanding is that you weren't born here.
No, I ended up in Pasadena because I always loved it. My father would bring us to the Rose Parade every year when I was small. And then a few times we'd come around Pasadena. It was so beautiful. And so when I married in 1951, we moved to LA. And we lived on 7th Avenue in a nice area, but I did not like LA, and I wanted to move to Pasadena. And my husband had a lot of friends that were here, and so we moved here. And I started becoming a part of Pasadena. When I was in LA, I had 2 children, and then I had 2 more. Then 1952, 53, and then in 55 and 56, I don't get times right, I had my 2 sons. So during that time, my activism was involved in my children and schools for them and their experiences. And there was a preschool that I was involved in. And it was from Pasadena City College. And so it got me back to I used to have to write and tell what the kids were doing. I'd had 2 at a time at this place. And that made me start thinking about going back to school. I'd graduated from San Bernardino Valley College, and so I decided I was going to go back to school. So I went to Los Angeles Cal State University. And
well, it seems like since you were raising the kids, you were involved in their education, and you were involved as an activist, so to speak, or at least an advocate in their classrooms. Is that what the influence was for you to want to be a teacher? Because eventually that's what you became, right?
Well, I'd always wanted to be a teacher. I used to make kids play school when I was growing up, and my parents both were educators. My mother had to stop when she got married. In those days in St. Louis, Missouri, you could not teach. My father was a teacher, and then he decided to go to the seminary and became a minister, an AME minister, because of my Uncle Nelson, who was an AME minister. And so that's how I ended up. I was born in Everett, Washington, when he was a presiding elder. And then after that, every 3 years they used to transfer them, and he was transferred to Spokane, Washington, and then Riverside, and then San Bernardino. And we ended up in San Bernardino because my father went to conference and he was changed to Independence, Kansas. And my mother had had enough of snow and a taste of California, and she refused. She was on her 11th child, and she
put her foot down.
She did, and she refused to move, and that's how I ended up in San Bernardino. And the San Bernardino, Pasadena, Riverside, Redlands, all of those communities were together when it was the Black community. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I knew about all these other places. My parents have always been activists and volunteers, and so it's automatic. You always involved yourself in whatever you were doing.
Exactly, so that you can make a difference, so that you can improve the conditions under which you were placed. So let's think a little bit about what was life like in Pasadena in the 50s and 60s, racially. How did folks get along?
Well, in Pasadena, it was a completely different racial setup. We had a big, wonderful community with lots of stores and businesses and all kinds of educated people.
And just to clarify, a Black community.
The Black community, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about where that was located?
It was located around Fair Oaks, a block from Colorado on Vernon, and Kensington. That was our first AME church was there, and it was a big, beautiful church, and we had a pipe organ when there were only two others in this town. We had so many professional people, and that was here. And Pasadena was the place. Everybody looked up to Pasadena. So anyway, I was involved in the church there, and all types of organizations within the church, and my husband and I worked with the teenagers, and took them on snow trips, and we were involved like that. And then when we were doing this so that when my children grew up, there would be something for them. And at the same time, I'm dealing with my children. In 1962, my husband died, and so then I had to really get involved and make sure everything was done the way it needed to be done. I was fortunate. I had a lot of friends and family that we all helped each other, and that's been my thing. Whatever we can do, we can work together and help each other. Now, even though Pasadena was very prejudiced, there were still people here that cared about people, and they worked hard to try to help make Pasadena better for black people. And then there were those that wanted to eliminate.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. And just to clarify, because Vernon Avenue doesn't exist anymore.
No.
So to be a little bit more precise, that's just below Colorado Boulevard, right? And where Pasadena Avenue is and St. John, in that area?
No, it was on the other side of Colorado. It was one block from Colorado, north of Colorado.
Oh.
And it was an area all the way through up into was the area except for Prospect and that part. But as you went east, that was a black neighborhood. There was Lincoln School.
Oh, right, which doesn't exist anymore either.
And people that lived on Prospect moved there, and they could have gone to any kind of school. They wanted to have their kids integrated, so they moved on Prospect so their kids could go to Lincoln.
Oh.
And so there were these. Pasadena was just an unusual place, and if you worked hard and you did your thing, you could make Pasadena, you could make it what you wanted it to be, and your associations.
Well, and there's a certain amount of aspiration, I think, for Pasadena to be a democratic, inclusive, diverse community. But it seems like we fall short in that sometimes. How have you seen sort of the change or the arc of that growth?
It's better because you see, before we had our setup, so we didn't really need to try to do anything but operate within the black community. But especially when you were teaching, you had only certain schools that you would be able to teach at.
As a black teacher.
As a black teacher. And any black person that went away to school, like Howard, any schools like that, when they came back here, they couldn't teach in Pasadena. So they would go down to El Centro, where Professor Payne and his wife had two schools, a high school and then the other up to the 8th grade. And those people that came back from those other schools, we had James Stokes was one of them, Mary Lou Phillips and Juanita Blakely, that were all top teachers in the school system.
But if you went to Howard or one of the other HBCUs, why couldn't you teach in Pasadena?
Because you were black, number one, and you couldn't you had to do intern, and that's where they did their intern. And Regina Moses, who was one of our top principals at San Rafael, Willard, and like that, her father was Professor Payne. And education was the most important thing in his life. His cousin was Carter G. Woodson, who was the head of Black history.
Right.
And so we were known, Pasadena in the black community was known all over the USA, believe it or not, through the church and through education, and like the NAACP.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about, or maybe give us a story about what some of the activities that you did as a teacher? How did you serve as a role model potentially, or as a mentor to the kids?
Oh, when I first started teaching, I used to go to my kids' houses and I checked on them and talked to their parents to make sure they knew that I was there to teach their kids and I was going to work with their children and I needed their help, and together we could give those kids the best education possible. I started a science club, and with some other teachers, we took kids to Salton Sea, Joshua Tree, Death Valley, and it was a science club, and it was started because I had gone on a hike with Outward Bound.
Oh, right.
Upward Bound.
No, it's Outward Bound.
Outward Bound. They hadn't started. This was a test at the John Muir Trail to see if they were going to do this, and so I was on that trip. And my two nephews and my daughter, who was
that around 1960 or 61 or?
Don't ask me about dates. I'm not good, but it was in the early 60s.
Yeah.
Yes.
It must have been.
It was like 64,
Yeah.
around in that time. We used to teach them how to make corsages and how to sell in order to pay for these trips. And we made them we always charged. It was little or nothing, but the idea is you charge, and it makes it better than if you just give it to them. And so I did that until I left for redevelopment.
Yeah, so that's an interesting story that I'd love to have you share. I think our viewers would be fascinated too. So just historically, just so I can catch people up, what's known as Kings Villages today, which is at the intersection of Washington and Fair Oaks. There's a development there, which is currently it's Section 8. It's affordable housing. It's subsidized by the government, and it's site-based. So the entire facility is Section 8 housing. What was the original intent of that development? I think it was called the Pepper Project, wasn't it?
It was started as a Pepper Project, and then it went on to redevelopment. And those were supposed to be townhouses. They cost $18,000 at that time, and they had the model and everything. But it wasn't so. They knew that people were not going to buy in that section, even though there was a bank across the street. They had taken the bank out. They took all kinds of places out. The only thing they couldn't move was Berry and Sweeney.
Yeah, it was just still there.
Which is there. There was a show. There were lots of other things there at one
So
time.
again, this is what you would term a black business district.
Right,
And
basically.
So a bank and then some other shops and businesses were taken out, right?
Right. And so that was, and I was a relocation specialist, and then there was a business specialist that moved all those businesses out.
Yeah.
And I moved all the residents out, and I couldn't stand it. I left it, and I went back to teaching.
Yeah. I want to know a little bit more about that, but before I talk about, or before I'd like you to answer, the original intent, I thought I heard you say that it was to have people from other parts of town move into that area. Is that right?
Into townhouses.
So white people?
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
Oh, yes. But
What was the thinking behind that? Why?
they knew that white people were not going to live in those townhouses. And so
Then why was it promoted that way?
well, because that whole redevelopment was black removal. We removed beautiful homes, and two-story tile fireplaces, chandeliers. All these houses were well-built, beautiful homes that were demolished. Then St. Barnabas helped put down further where you see these nice homes that have been there by the Jackie Robinson Park.
Yeah.
Those homes, that was also a thing that was for black people, and it was a village sorta. Mm-hmm. It lasted, I think, 5 years, and then they demolished it.
Okay, we're going to talk about St. Barnabas in a minute, but I want to circle back to your job as a redevelopment specialist. How did that feel to have to, so essentially there were black families living on Fair Oaks and Claremont and some of those other streets in that area. How did that feel to have to, and what were you asked to do to help find them another house? Or?
Yes, I would I helped them find other housing, and I would check with them to see anything that they needed, and I would work with them in any kind of way it was possible until they were able to be moved. A couple of times I told these people, don't move there, and they did anyway, and that was a big mistake. But I could only say don't. And lots of them found some good housing. One of the ladies that she worked with, she was affiliated with, let me see, I'm thinking about, anyhow, she was affiliated with this man that was in the movies, that did all kinds of music in the movies. I'll think of his name in a minute. But anyway, I helped move her up to a place that later has changed, but at one time it was pretty nice. And she did all the vestments for the diocese as well as St. Barnabas. And she lived to be about 105, and she was very, she was very proper, and you did everything, and she had her tea and like that. And so there were good people. In fact, those people even had
So there were professionals, there were people, educated folks who were, essentially they were sold out from under them, or
it was taken away from them, and it was held off as long as possible. And there was nothing else they could do.
Right, they had no option.
That's right. And that was my job.
I could see how that would be very fatiguing and depressing work.
That's right. And I thought, I can't do that. I took a big pay cut, but I went back to teaching.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about St. Barnabas. For a lot of people, they just drive by in Fair Oaks, they don't even see it because it's so small. But do you know a little bit, can you tell a little bit about the history of how St. Barnabas was started? And again, it's right across the street from Robinson Park, and it's a small Episcopalian parish.
Yes.
But how was it started?
Jackie Robinson place.
Yeah, Jackie Robinson Center.
Now, what I've heard, that it was started at All Saints because they did not want the people that worked for them to go to the church. So they opened up St. Barnabas, and it's a beautiful little mission church, gorgeous inside, well done. And then later on they built a hall that was nice and big, and Sunday school rooms there. And they have a nice grass area. It was a very nice little thing,
yeah.
But it was small. But most of the people that went there were professionals.
Oh.
And lots of them were Episcopalians if they came from any of the islands or places like that, Jamaica, any place like that. They went there because they were Episcopalians from birth. And so I came here later. I was AME, totally.
So how did that happen that you switched over to?
AME was the freeway came in and took AME, and we had to.
So first AME was demolished because of the freeway, and then moved up on Raymond.
Right, and the Japanese had a house across the street from us, and they have the Presbyterian Japanese complex that's further up on Lincoln. But So anyway, and we owned property right across the street, and so AME was they saved the stained glass windows. There's a huge one that's in the other church in the back, and in their hall there's the other windows that people had bought and put there with their names in stained glass that was all around the church. It was a beautiful church, and you could open it up and expand it if you had a lot of people. They used to have a lot of conferences and stuff there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can see that there was movement from old Pasadena up Fair Oaks, and then even on Fair Oaks there was redevelopment or demolition of black neighborhoods. So the freeway was one system that did that, but then also redevelopment was another system that did that.
Right. And see, there were two. The Metropolitan Church used to be a huge, big edifice. And then they took that. The freeway ran right through where that church had been, and there were others. And Friendship Church was still there because it was in a different place. But had it been down in the eastern part, that's where Woods Valentine Mortuary was down in there, and it was a whole. It was people of color down there besides black people. And then on the western side, you went so far, and it was a black area.
Yeah. So your evolution then to St. Barnabas, and then eventually you moved to All Saints Church. Can you tell a story about how that happened?
Yes. St. Barnabas, I was there, and I was on the vestry, and we didn't have any program at all for children. And it just wasn't what it needed to be. And I was a good friend of George Regas. We used to be football people that when our sons played football at Poly. And so, and at that time my child was 3. I started when she was 3 months old being there. And he didn't exactly say leave, but he also made me feel that I would be welcome if I came to All Saints. And so things were just not the way I felt at St. Barnabas. And so it was easy for me. I went to All Saints to sit on the bench. I was not going to do anything. Just go.
Just go and listen to the sermons and. But then eventually you.
Tim Safford, who has Christ Church in Philadelphia now, has been there for quite a few years. Tim started a speech choir and had it in the liturgy. And I had been doing drama and putting on programs for years and years, and my mother had done it prior to me doing it. I learned a lot from her as I was growing up. And so I did the same thing at all the churches and the schools where I was. I used to put on the programs at the schools. Anyway, so that was, I joined the speech choir, and after that, everything mushroomed. I'm involved in everything, and that made me involved in a lot of other things in the city. And at the time, you know, when we had the court case, integration.
The Brown versus Board of it. Well,
yes,
no, not Brown versus.
That one, okay.
Right. It's the court case that created
that we had to integrate the schools.
Yes, it was
and
a
Pasadena
desegregation order. Judge Manuel Riel.
If you might have had some children that lived in areas that would go to schools that were predominantly completely white, and a few Mexicans would go there. And so my daughters were one of my daughters, Karen, was in 6th grade. And Helen Chris and they told us, Dr. Pitts was trying to bring about things in the district, integration and helping people learn to work together and be together. And so if you provided transportation, your kids could go to any school that wasn't full. So we took 5 kids and took them to Don Benito. And so, and Don Benito had some mentally challenged kids that were black. That's how they thought all black kids were like. So when our kids were taken there, Karen and Linda Knox, who was the violinist, Karen played the piano and they played the school song and graduated from the 6th grade. And so in the meantime, they had made friends, and so they said, well, where are you going to go to high school? And no, to middle school, I guess. And so Dr. Pitts asked me to get in touch with people and have them send letters to the school board of their experiences at these schools, those that took advantage at different schools. And so I turned those in, and so he opened up Marshall, and there was a bus that went up on Forest and Washington, and that bus was filled with kids. So they had a few black kids there, and was filled with kids that were taken across town instead of to Washington Junior High at the time, and the high schools were different. And so anyhow, that's how that came about. Yeah. And so I've constantly been involved in different things that needed to be done. Like with the preschool, they had a 4-year group. My son was in that 4-year group, which was only at schools like Webster. And at that time, Jackson was different too, before the freeway.
Yeah, we only have a few seconds left. Unfortunately, I wish I could ask you a multitude of other questions, but I was wondering, what do you think your legacy is? How do you think you'll be remembered?
They'll remember me as a teacher that did not play, and I was, but I loved them, and I would take care of them and do anything. And I've had kids come back that have said thank you, and they'll tell you in a minute, you did not miss. And they thought I knew judo because this kid was high at Washington Junior High, and I was doing the guidance lab, and somehow or another I tripped him and made him fall. And so I could control him because he'd gone wild. And so the word went around, I knew judo. And yeah. I was in pretty good shape anyway.
You had magical powers.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being here today, and we really appreciate the fact that you made the time to be on The Power of One. And you've been an inspiration for a long, long time to me and many others in the community. So thank you, Alma.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I just have a job to do, and I do it. And my trust is in the Lord, and I try to live. And you know, when you talk about Jesus, and you say, I don't like to say I'm a Christian anymore for other reasons, but I live and I try to live, and that's the way I do. And people will know me from that, whether it's neighborhood or whatever it is.
And they will.
And
I'm sure of it. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you for watching The Power of One. This has been Alma Stokes, Community Volunteer.